A single front door can hide an entire world, and in some British neighborhoods, the doorstep of an ordinary home led into a life far larger and stranger than anyone passing by could imagine. Behind curtains that fluttered like any other, behind windows that showed nothing unusual, families lived with two separate realities layered on top of each other. One was the face they showed to the world, modest, stable, sometimes even struggling. The other was kept quiet, an unseen life where money moved like a silent current, and decisions were made carefully so that no one would ever suspect the truth. In cities across the UK, this double life grew in the quiet corners where neighbors trusted one another, where no one questioned the routine hum of everyday living. Families who appeared humble, who filled out benefit forms, who queued in supermarkets and waved politely at passers-by, were sometimes guiding operations that stretched far beyond their postcodes. Their homes carried the warmth of family life, photos on the wall, school shoes by the door, kettles always ready to boil. Yet within that normality was a second layer of existence, managed with a calmness that made it nearly invisible. It often began not with ambition, but with opportunity. Someone in the household knew someone else who was already connected. Perhaps a partner found themselves involved first, and the family adapted around it. The outside world saw them as a family relying on government support, but the second reality grew quietly in the background. In that hidden lane, decisions weren't loud or chaotic. They were steady, calculated in a way that did not disturb the everyday rhythm. This careful balance allowed things to continue unnoticed because the ordinary routines never slipped. The contrast between appearance and hidden reality created a kind of protective layer. Benefit claims painted a picture of financial difficulty, one that required assistance. Receipts matched the story. Paperwork aligned with the expected life of a household that seemed to be struggling. Meanwhile, a separate system was functioning beneath these layers. Planned conversations, subtle movements, steps taken with just enough precision to avoid attracting attention. The lines between the two lives didn't clash. They existed side by side, each helping to shield the other. For many families, the hidden activity didn't disrupt the domestic calm. People still cooked meals, still helped children with homework, still visited relatives on weekends. This allowed the illusion of simplicity to grow stronger. When neighbors glanced over, they saw nothing unusual, just a family getting through each day. The familiarity of routine made it even harder for anyone to imagine a second existence woven through the same hours and spaces. Over time, that hidden world matured into something more structured. The routines of the house shaped when certain decisions could be made and when communication needed to remain quiet. Daylight hours were filled with school runs and errands. Evenings brought the gentle hum of household life. Within those spaces, messages were exchanged, plans made, connections maintained. The family navigated both realities as if they were simply two different responsibilities that had to coexist. The double life wasn't about glamour or bold expression. It was about blending, adapting, fitting into the fabric of everyday life so seamlessly that nothing looked out of place. Benefits provided a public narrative that was believable and consistent, and this narrative served as a mask, one that made the hidden reality easier to maintain. A family showing signs of financial struggle rarely becomes the focus of suspicion, and this very assumption gave the second reality room to breathe. Inside the home, small changes formed the architecture of the hidden life. A phone kept separately from the usual devices, conversations held in quiet corners, notes written in ways that seemed like reminders for ordinary errands. Nothing looked dramatic. Everything appeared rooted in the normal flow of household responsibilities. The family's public image as people simply managing their daily challenges made the unseen layer feel even safer. Despite the calm exterior, the weight of sustaining two realities required a certain discipline. Those living this double life learned how to keep expressions steady, how to carry on with ordinary tasks without revealing the tension underneath. They didn't draw attention with sudden changes in behavior. Their routine stayed consistent, and consistency became a form of protection. While the hidden world required careful organization, the visible world required authenticity, genuine enough that even close friends didn't suspect a thing. Community interactions acted as a quiet shield, a friendly smile at the local shopkeeper, polite small talk with neighbors, participation in everyday routines all contributed to the illusion. Familiarity made people comfortable, and when people are comfortable, they don't look for anything more. This natural invisibility became one of the strongest foundations of the double life. The benefit system added another layer of believability, with paperwork confirming limited income, with support coming in regularly, nothing suggested an alternative reality. Even official documents reinforced the family's outward identity. This alignment between public record and daily behavior created a sense of stability that made the hidden reality nearly undetectable at a glance. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere shifted in subtle ways. Doors were locked not just for privacy, but for peace of mind. Conversations were brief, measured, almost practiced. Certain topics were avoided around young ears. The unseen life required caution, and caution often came wrapped in silence. The family learned to move within that silence the way others move through routine, naturally, without drawing attention. Still, there were moments when the weight of that hidden world made its presence felt. Quiet nights where someone lay awake wondering whether the balance could hold, or whether a simple misstep in the everyday routine could shift everything. Those moments of reflection didn't break the illusion, they deepened the awareness of it. Yet each morning, life resumed as usual, and the calm exterior slipped back into place. The fascinating part of this double life wasn't the hidden world itself, but how effortlessly it fitted into the structure of ordinary British family life. The familiar setting of semi-detached homes, school corridors, corner shops, and weekly schedules created a backdrop where the extraordinary became almost invisible. The families didn't need dramatic gestures to maintain their hidden world. They simply needed to preserve the rhythm of the life everyone believed they were living. This contrast, the everyday and the unseen, created a story that stretched across kitchens filled with morning chatter, living rooms warmed by television glow, and neighborhoods where everyone felt they knew each other. And at the center of it all were the families who mastered the art of appearing ordinary while quietly carrying a reality few would ever imagine existed just beyond the threshold of their front door.
The market's narrow stretch was usually easy to navigate, but today something felt different, almost as if the street itself had paused to listen. Every familiar corner carried an unfamiliar tension, soft but persistent, like a quiet note held too long on a piano. People who would normally hurry past were now slowing down, looking around with the kind of curiosity that comes when the ordinary suddenly seems layered with hidden meaning. As we moved forward, the soundscape shifted again. Footsteps brushing the pavement, a vendor adjusting his stall, the faint rustle of paper signs fluttering in the breeze. These tiny sounds felt louder than usual, as though the world was reminding everyone to pay attention. And perhaps they did, because there was something in the air that didn't belong to routine. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was the sense that a small detail, easily overlooked, carried the weight of a larger truth. A few steps ahead, A handful of people stood near the corner where the road curved gently toward the residential lane. They weren't gathered in alarm. Rather, they lingered in a kind of thoughtful quiet, their gazes drifting from the pavement to the windows above, trying to piece together what they had witnessed earlier. Their expressions held that look people get when they know a moment is important but cannot yet explain why. One man, wearing a light gray jacket that blended into the muted tones of the street, kept adjusting his glasses as though clarity might emerge if he just focused a little harder. A woman next to him folded her arms, not in discomfort but in contemplation. A teenager, perhaps on his way home from school, stood slightly apart from the others, earphones unplugged, attention fixed on the same point they were all studying. It was rare to see people of different ages so synchronized in their curiosity, united without exchanging a word. The street didn't answers. It never does. Instead, it offered clues, subtle ones, like the way a curtain on the second floor trembled lightly, or how a shopkeeper leaned over his counter with a hint of concern, softening his usually brisk manner. These were the kinds of signs that revealed the emotional pulse of a neighborhood without ever saying anything directly. Someone whispered that they had noticed something unusual earlier, in the afternoon, something small enough to dismiss at the time. Another person nodded, as if confirming a private theory. But even in these hushed exchanges, no one seemed ready to claim certainty. They were navigating impressions, fragments, and that lingering feeling that the day had shifted in a way that wouldn't fully make sense until later. We kept walking slowly, mirroring the tempo of the street. Every detail felt amplified. The faded paint on the lampposts, the soft hum of an air conditioner from an upstairs window, the distant clatter of a delivery truck unloading crates further down the block. Even the shadows seemed more deliberate, stretching across the ground as if sketching an unfinished pattern. And yet, amid all this subtle tension, there was an undeniable sense of calm resilience. Neighbors exchanged small nods, acknowledging each other's presence. The fruit seller at the corner pushed his cart a little forward, offering a slice of melon to a child passing by, restoring a bit of normal rhythm to the scene. These gestures didn't erase the questions lingering in everyone's mind, but they grounded the moment, reminding all who stood there that communities know how to steady themselves even when uncertainty drifts in. What made this part of the story compelling wasn't what had happened, it was how people reacted to the unknown. Their quiet observations, their thoughtful pauses, their instinctive cooperation without needing instructions. The heart of the neighborhood revealed itself not in noise, but in the way people stood together, breathing through the unexpected. As we reached the bend in the street, the breeze shifted again, carrying with it the aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. The scent wrapped around the scene like a soft reset, bringing warmth back into the cool hush of the afternoon. Slowly, conversations resumed. A few people began to disperse, returning to their routines, though their expression showed they were carrying the moment with them, storing it somewhere in memory. But even as life began to slide back into its usual pace, one thing was clear. The day had changed shape. Something subtle had entered the collective awareness of the neighborhood, and though no one could name it yet, everyone had felt it. And now, as the street exhaled and movement returned, the story was ready to open its next chapter, waiting quietly for the next clue to reveal itself.
And just as the street regained its rhythm, almost as if the neighborhood had collectively decided to breathe again, a new layer of curiosity drifted into the atmosphere, softly, like a page turning itself in a quiet bookshop. No one said it out loud, but people sensed that the story hadn't settled yet.
Something was still unfolding behind the surface, something threaded through small details that didn't quite match the simplicity of an ordinary day. A man stepped out of a nearby doorway, locking it carefully before walking toward the edge of the pavement. His deliberate movements suggested a habit of staying aware, the kind of awareness that comes from living long enough to recognize when everyday life carries an extra shadow. He wasn't nervous. Instead, he carried himself with a steady calm, scanning the street the way gardeners inspect a patch of soil before planting anything new. His eyes lingered for a moment on the spot where people had gathered earlier, as though he was replaying something he had witnessed from behind his curtains. Further down the road, a woman carrying grocery bags paused mid-step. The plastic rustled softly as she shifted her weight, trying to decide whether to continue walking or stop to understand whatever subtle current everyone seemed to be sensing. She tilted her head slightly, listening, not for a sound, but for an explanation that the world often gives without words. After a moment, she resumed her pace, though she moved a little slower, the question still tugging gently at her thoughts. The sky, a pale stretch of evening silver, cast a soft glow across the houses. It was the kind of light that makes familiar places feel slightly unreal, as if a thin veil had been placed over everything. The shadows lengthened, not ominously, but with quiet patience, the way dusk always does when it knows it has plenty of time to settle in. Birds perched on the wires overhead, observing the street below with their usual stillness, completely unbothered by the human tension floating beneath them. As we continued along the curve of the street, the neighborhood seemed to rearrange itself, not physically, but in mood. Doorbells chimed faintly as residents returned home. A child tugged at her mother's hand, pointing at a stray cat hiding behind a stack of crates. Every normal sound felt both grounding and strangely heightened, as if the neighborhood was whispering, "Life goes on, even when you're trying to decode its mysteries." Someone leaned out of an upstairs window to shake out a small rug, pausing halfway to glance down at the street. His brief, thoughtful stare hinted that he too had noticed the peculiar calm earlier. Even from above, he seemed to sense that the day had carried a moment worth filing away, a detail that would make sense only in hindsight. With a soft thud of fabric, he finished his task and disappeared inside. At the corner, a bus slowed until it sighed to a stop. Passengers stepped off, adjusting bags, jackets, and their own internal clocks. One man, elderly and wrapped in a beige coat, stood still for a moment after stepping onto the pavement. He looked around with the gentle curiosity of someone who has seen enough life to know when a place feels slightly off balance. His gaze softened with recognition when he spotted a friend approaching. The two exchanged a modest nod before walking together in silence. Their quiet companionship, ordinary, unforced, gave the street a touch of warmth that felt almost intentional. The houses lining the road carried their usual expressions, some freshly painted, some chipped at the edges, all holding stories within their walls. But today they seemed to watch the street more closely, as though they too were waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to reveal itself. Curtains fluttered, lights clicked on in measured intervals. Every home seemed to breathe with the people inside it, each window offering a soft, flickering hint of life. As we moved toward the area where a small cluster of shops stood, an off-license, a bakery, a phone repair kiosk, the air felt slightly warmer. The bakery door kept opening and closing, releasing waves of comforting aroma that blended with the crisp evening breeze. A young man behind the counter wiped down trays with a slow, steady rhythm, glancing occasionally toward the front window. He didn't look alarmed. Instead, he seemed genuinely invested in understanding why the earlier hush had stretched so far down the block. A group of friends walked past the storefronts, their conversation lively enough to contrast with the quiet moments happening around them. They laughed at something one of them said, the sound ringing lightly across the pavement, reminding everyone that ordinary joy still lived here. Their presence restored a bit of balance to the scene, like adding a splash of brightness to a nearly monochrome picture. But even with these bursts of everyday life, the earlier curiosity hadn't fully dispersed. It lingered, subtle and persistent, like a scent you can't quite identify. People weren't uneasy, they were alert, observing, interpreting, wondering what the day's quiet disruption meant in the larger story of the neighborhood. And that was the striking part. Nothing dramatic had happened in front of them, nothing loud, nothing chaotic. Yet everyone sensed that something important had shifted behind the scenes. This was the kind of moment that often precedes revelations in documentaries, not a climax, but a quiet hinge where the story prepares to turn. As dusk finally settled and the first streetlights flickered awake, the neighborhood seemed to exhale again. The earlier pause, the collective curiosity, the silent questions, all of it folded neatly into the evening air, settling like dust on a bookshelf. People continued their routines, doors closed softly, conversations drifted behind living room windows. The street, now washed in a warm amber glow, carried itself with the gentle confidence of a place that had seen much, understood much, and waited patiently for the next clue to reveal itself. And in that quiet readiness, the story pressed forward, unhurried but unstoppable, preparing to uncover what lay just beyond the edge of what everyone had noticed.